Stay tuned. Ahead, I'll talk with New York Times bestselling author Fiona Davis about her novel, The Stolen Queen. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Fiona Davis is the author of several best-selling novels, including The Spectacular, The Magnolia Palace, and Lions of Fifth Avenue. She joins us to talk about The Stolen Queen. Fiona, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thank you for having me, Dan. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, you're known for writing books that are centered around pieces of architecture in New York City. And this time it's the Metropolitan Museum. And so tell us a bit about the inspiration to feature the Met this time and also this connection to Egypt.
Yeah, sure. So the Met had always fascinated me as a location, but it also really intimidated me because it's enormous. There's 18 or 19 different departments. I didn't know my way in. And then I read an article in the New York Times about the 2018 Met Gala. And it talked about Kim Kardashian and how she wore this gold glittery skin-tight gown. And at one point, she posed next to this gold glittery sarcophagus that the Met had just bought the year before for $4 million. And the photo went viral to the point that the Jordanian smuggler who had originally stolen the sarcophagus complained to an undercover informant that he'd never gotten paid. And that got back to the Manhattan DA's office that has a whole unit on stolen art. And they investigated and found that the export license of the sarcophagus had been forged. And it was fake. And so in the end, the Met had to return it. And I just thought, what an interesting mix of pop culture and ancient art all embodied in one building. And that's when I thought, okay, that's my way in. I'll do something that's a little bit about the Met Gala, a little bit about the Egyptian wing, and go from there. And it was really fascinating researching the Egyptian wing because it's just incredible. But the history of Egypt is so vast. And I did go back to Egypt, or I went to Egypt. I'd never been there before, and sailed down the Nile and saw the Valley of the Kings and Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. Went to Cairo. Went to all the museums. It was just a remarkable experience. And my hope is in the book, it's as if the reader in reading it is going to Egypt as well.
Now, in this book, you've created a queen based on the queen who you saw her temple in Egypt. So tell us a bit about that fictitious queen and why you chose to make it a fictional queen instead of using a real female pharaoh from Egyptian history?
That's a great question. And I was very inspired by Hatshepsut, who's the real one. And in the book, she's renamed Hatharkare because the story of Hatshepsut is just so incredible, but it spans over a long time. And I needed to compress it in order to make it work in the book. In the book, there's a curator named Charlotte who works at the Egyptian art collection. And she's one of the main characters. She's 60 years old. She's been working there a long time. And she's really obsessed with Hatshepsut, Hatharkare in the book. She's just fascinated by this woman because the original female pharaoh, she married her half-brother at the age of 12. And then he died 7 years later. And at that point, there was no male heir other than the infant son of a concubine. So Hatshepsut stepped up and was regent. For 20 years, very successfully, great reign. But then later, after her death, the stepson ordered her statue smashed. And so she kind of disappeared from history. And it wasn't until the 1920s, and there were some excavators from the Met and archaeologists who were looking at the area, and they found this quarry filled of the broken statues. And they realized, oh, this woman was very important. And, there are just so many permeations of her life. And there's one point where, pretty much no one knew about her. So it was almost like she was erased. And then they realized, oh, no, she was important. And then she was revitalized. And so I thought that was a fascinating story. And then recently her mummy was just found in a very dramatic way. And I wanted to recreate that in the book. But in doing that, it means that I'm taking credit away from the people who actually made those discoveries. And I didn't want to do that. I needed my curator to just be in charge. And so it was easier to rename her, but explain very clearly in the author's note what's fact and what's fiction.
And you have some interesting themes that you explore in this book. and dual timelines as well, which I want to have you tell us about in a moment. But your curator, she is trying to establish herself, but she's kind of being discredited, and people don't take her seriously, much like they didn't take this female pharaoh seriously.
Yeah, exactly. There's echoes of what happened to Hatshepsut in Charlotte's life as well. She does all the work in the Egyptian art collection, but gets none of the credit. Her boss is always taking credit for what she's done. And she really wants to, she's 60 and she wants to define herself as an important archaeologist. And this is her one chance to do it. And she doesn't want it to go wrong.
So this story takes place in dual timelines. And one goes back to when that curator was young and in Egypt, and then the current timeline. So tell us about the two different years that you're jumping back and forth between.
Yeah, sure. So part of the book takes place in 1978, and that's when Charlotte is 60. She's working as a curator, and she is very unwillingly teamed up with an overeager 19-year-old assistant to the Met Gala named Annie in order to track down a stolen artifact. And so part of the book in the early section does jump back to when Charlotte was just 18 or 19, and she was a young archaeologist just starting out, in Egypt, surrounded by a team of all men, and again, trying to make her way. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to show how she was this fierce, fearless young woman. And then certain events happened that turned her into a very almost imprisoned woman. She's imprisoned in her own tragedy when she's 60. And so by meeting Annie, who's, very overeager and innocent and not very good at her job, the two of them have to team up. And I love the idea of these two absolute misfits. They do not belong together. One's older, one's younger, one's very knowledgeable, the other is green as can be. And that they have to work together to figure things out. And together they both help each other in a way, figure out who they are, what they want, and how to get it.
As you mentioned, with the inspiration for this novel, there was this case where it was a stolen artifact and it had to be returned. So that shows up in your novel as well. So I'm curious about sort of the research that you did and kind of very interested in sort of how things may have been in 1978 versus how they are today in terms of how museums approach those artifacts that might have been obtained in a less than ethical way.
That's so well put. That's very well put. Yeah, it's a real problem. And in the 1970s, a lot of museums got together and kind of agreed on best practices because they realized they did have these objects that had been looted or robbed from the country of origin. But it's only gotten more difficult, if anything. Today, museums, not only the Met, but every museum is grappling with the question of what do they do with these things that don't belong in their collection. So you go back to the Elgin marbles that were taken from the Parthenon or at the British Museum. And then there's these Benin bronzes that were in what's now modern Nigeria. And they were violently and there's this bloody takeover by the British, and they basically took anything they wanted from the country. And now, of course, these beautiful bronzes are scattered all over the world, and they want them back. But there are so many questions about how you go about it, because what if the country of origin doesn't have a safe place to store them? What if they don't even have a museum? What if the government needs money, and so they sell them to a billionaire who tucks them away from researchers, away from scholars? And so it's a tough question. Do these objects belong to humanity? Do they belong to the country of origin? And it's a problem that's still going on today. So I knew I had to raise it in the book. I certainly don't answer the question, but I wanted it to be raised in the book as a way of just bringing attention to what a conundrum these museums are in.
I'm talking with Fiona Davis about The Stolen Queen, and our conversation continues in a moment. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. Well, of course, in your novel, you introduce some additional twists. For example, is there an artifact that is cursed in some way?
Yeah, I just thought it would be fun to have a curse. Of course, there's curses associated with King Tut and his tomb, and anyone who went in there were they cursed. The patron who really financed the dig for King Tut, he died 6 weeks after it was opened, and he died of a mosquito bite that got infected. So it's not, it doesn't seem to be a curse, but I thought it would be an interesting thing to play with. So in the book, anyone who takes anything that Hathor Kare cherishes out of Egypt is doomed and is going to be cursed. And so Charlotte never intentionally took anything out of Egypt, but through a series of events, something does get a number of things get taken out. And so she feels very guilty about that and wonders if she is cursed. And curses aren't all that common in Egyptian folklore, actually. But I think, our version is kind of fun to play with, and it adds a kind of magical element to the story, which I really liked.
Well, one of the themes in your book is about giving proper due to women in history. Because here is a queen that is being dismissed, and also here is this curator who's being dismissed. So part of what we get from the book is it's important to give women credit where credit's due. And sometimes you have to go back in time to do that, and other times it's just treating women as equals in the present day.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating studying history and how these cycles happen. Because when you look at ancient Egypt, women had a lot of rights. They were able to get divorced. If they got divorced, they could keep their property and their children. They could have a child out of wedlock. It was no problem. There was a lot of freedom. And then you look at women in 1978, where they couldn't even get a credit card or a loan or a mortgage without a man co-signing. And of course, that seems crazy today, but that's pretty recent. And so I love to see how cycles happen, how things change over time for women, how they don't, and just point them out in the book in a way that, as you're reading, you don't take for granted what's going on right now, and you also understand how far we still have to go. And so, both Charlotte and Hathor Kare in the book have to find their own voices and stand up for themselves and take their place in history as they should.
We've touched upon a couple, but what would you say are some of the other themes that this book explores?
Yeah, it's about mothers and daughters. It's about female friendships. It's about mentors and mentees. But I think, what I want viewers to come away with is when you look at a museum like the Met, and it's this huge collection, right? It has 1.5 million objects in its collection, and only 6% are on view at any time. And so when you do see those 6%, to look at these pieces of art not as an object, but as a story, and find out the stories behind them. And how by doing that, we can really enrich our sense of time and places of the past.
Fiona, there's a question that I like to ask authors of fiction, and it's this. If you could spend a day in real life with one of the characters from this novel, who would it be and why?
Oh, that is so hard to choose. I love that question, though. I would say I would like to be Charlotte in a 1930s dig in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. I would love to go back in time and see what that was like. And, eat the food, smell the smells, see what it's like as the sand blows over the sun and everything turns orange, and to be transported back in that era.
Well, you had to do a lot of research for this book. You went to Egypt. The Met itself is a challenge, I'm sure. Tell us a little bit about that research that went into the book.
Yeah, at the Met, I interviewed as many people as I could in very different roles, from security guard to docent to curator to technician to art handler to a Met Gala staffer. It was really fun to get all of these different perspectives because it is like a small city. It's enormous. And so I learned really fun things like, I was taken to the staff caf, which is the cafeteria where they all eat. I learned that there's a job called a lamper, and that they just change light bulbs. And just all of these fun things. And also learning about the Met Gala of 1970 and how outrageous it was. And, that you had Diana Ross and Mick Jagger coming, and then for the exhibit, they pumped in perfume. It was just all these small details that I hope bring the reader right into the space and right into the mindset of the characters and make the whole era come alive.
And what's interesting is because, obviously they're taking care of the museum, but then they have to do this Met Gala. So that requires an exceptional amount of planning. And at least in the case of your version of the Met Gala, it didn't quite go as well as they had hoped.
No, and in the story, I was thinking, okay, the Met Gala is going to be a seminal scene. It's about midway through the book, and I needed it to go wrong. And I thought, well, what's the worst thing that could happen at the Met Gala? An exhibition of clothes and, beautiful, old, delicate clothes. And so that's what I did. I won't say what I did because there's spoilers, but it was a really fun scene to write. And the Met Gala back then was run by this wonderful woman named Deanna Vreeland. And she was a special consultant. She was an ex-Vogue editor. She was a tornado of a woman with very strong opinions. And, she's known for saying things like, the best thing about London is Paris. And unshined shoes are the end of civilization. She had these great pronouncements that she'd make. And so that was fun to figure out what it was like in the 70s, which was very different from what it is now, where it's just this, huge event with a red carpet and lots of press and, pop singers and everything like that. In the 70s, it was a little more sedate, but not much. And just to show how it's changed, in 1949, when the Met Gala began, and then it was just kind of a luncheon in a hotel, the tickets were $49. And today, a ticket to the Met Gala goes for $75,000.
Wow.
I know.
I won't be going anytime soon.
No. And, it raises $26 million for the museum. So it's a very, financially lucrative event on the first Monday of May of every year.
So congratulations. This book has only been out a little over a week, and already it's a best-selling novel. So it joins along with your other best-selling novels. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
And I have to ask, what's next for you?
Sure. The next book is set at a very little-known house in Manhattan. It's the oldest house in Manhattan. It's known as the Morris Jumel Mansion. Very few, even New Yorkers, have heard of it. It's up on 160th Street near the Harlem River. And it's a beautiful mansion with a storied history and some really crazy characters who live there. And so I'm having a lot of fun playing with that and bringing that to life.
The novel is The Stolen Queen by Fiona Davis. Fiona, thank you for talking with me today.
Dan, thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
If you would like to purchase The Stolen Queen, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.